This is the ICO Alert Podcast, Episode 4. I'm your host, Robert Finch, founder of ICO Alert. ICO Alert is the trusted source for analysis of ICOs, otherwise known as initial coin offerings. We maintain a comprehensive list of ICOs on our website at ICOalert.com. If you're new to the ICO space or even the blockchain space, don't worry, we've got you covered. Head to start.icoalert.com, where we have helpful introductions to this exciting new world, introductions about ICOs, and introductions about the blockchain space in general. That's start, START.icoalert.com. My guests today are Hando Rand, the CEO and project lead of Agrello, and Alex Norta, the lead scientist at Agrello. During the podcast, we'll talk about the Agrello platform, what makes a smart contract legally binding, artificial intelligence and its use in their platform, and more. Without further ado, let's get to it. Hando and Alex, thanks so much for joining me today.
Pleased to be with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you both. So first of all, I think before we get started, there are a lot of users that are listening to the podcast that probably have never heard of Agrello, or if they have, they're not 100% sure what it is. So if you all could sort of give a brief overview of the platform and what you guys are trying to accomplish, that'd be great.
Yeah, I can go into this. It has began quite some years ago, over 2 years ago, I would say, where I found a way to put legal contracts together, as I have a legal background, in an informatic way. And I foresaw that you can compile this into a computer code. And now we have come to a place when we are implementing the technology where you can put together a contract based on text, human readable text, and it's structured in a way that it's possible to automatically compile it into computer code. And that happens because we went deep into the core concept of legal contracts. So a contract is mostly a network of rights and obligations, and we have structured the way you put together rights and obligations, and this can be reflected directly in contract code. And what that enables is that we can have those artificial software agents. BDI agents, they are called. Alex can later explain what they are. So those agents can understand those contract terms, because all those obligations and rights, they have a life cycle. They become active after some event happens, and then after the deadline, they become either performed or delayed or breached. And with this information, the contract execution process can evolve. Those agents can understand this information, and they can push notifications and information to the parties that about what to do next, and what is the other party doing, what are the risks. And also it creates this opportunity that you can embed a legal contract to devices, like IoT devices, which are connected to the internet, where we can automate the physical real world with a contract which is made smart, which is digital. So the devices act accordingly to the contract. And also, you can integrate the internet, payment devices, payment solutions, and other software to automate the contractual process. So this data logistics system, and around this, we want to build a business collaboration hub where people can come in, provide services, and other people can get those services, but we want to solve this legal burden as we are making a contract template repository where lawyers all over the world create contract templates, put them up to the repository, and those who provide services can get those templates.
Okay.
And they pay a little bit of fee for that, and this is rewarded to the template creator. But they can get this contract template and start a legal relationship with their customer really easily with just a few simple steps. And the community repository and the community around the template creation make sure that the contract is up to date and it's very good.
So there's a lot, before you go any further, I appreciate the in-depth explanation, but there is certainly a lot being talked about there. If we could just kind of unpack that, it sounds a lot of what you're referring to would be smart contracts, smart contracts that we see on Ethereum and other platforms. So could you talk a little bit about those smart contracts and how they're different from another platform like Ethereum?
Yeah, sure. Ethereum and Solidity smart contracts are based on JavaScript, and mostly they're regarded to as computer code, program code. And what makes it work is that a software developer puts his knowledge into this, creates this code, those functions there to make it work. But a developer usually doesn't have much legal knowledge, so it's quite inconvenient to have a developer make a contract for private relationships. Yes, there might be some use cases for Solidity in the sense, in the nature as they are right now, but for private business contracts, it's not very preferable. So we have created a way to put this together in text, so legal specialists can put those contracts together. And the other thing is that Ethereum smart contracts are publicly on the blockchain, so they are publicly available. This is something what business people in this private sector world, they don't want this. Our solution stores the contract data off chain and gives full control for the parties over their own data. And we use public blockchain only for track record or keeping hashes in the public blockchain to show that the information off chain is as was registered and agreed upon.
Interesting. So it seems like you guys are essentially gearing this towards businesses, or is it just anybody that's looking for, and it, correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially a legally binding smart contract?
Yes, that's exactly the direction, and it's meant for. We're creating this peer-to-peer collaboration platform, and this is meant for individuals as well as like freelancers and smaller businesses who use actually contract templates all the time. They just Google for it, which is not very good. And we also have this bigger enterprise business development part to our business, and but the technology would cover all the sectors.
Very cool. So it seems to me you guys are doing a sort of a lot of things here. There's a smart contract, but then there's also a legal aspect to it. And I think what I'm most curious about, how is your smart contract legally binding while Ethereum smart contracts aren't, or are Ethereum's also legally binding?
Ethereum smart contract can be used in a legally binding relationship, but it needs more. The smart contract code itself should have comments inside, which actually give responsibilities, because the code itself, it's really hard to understand what are the responsibilities, who is responsible of this certain function to work. And the other thing is that Ethereum doesn't necessarily require any identification to be in this network and go around there. So you have to complement the Ethereum smart contract with a lot of things. And the other thing is that writing legal obligations into the smart contract code, it takes huge amounts of time. And this wouldn't be, it's much less practical. It is possible maybe to make them legal, but the way they are usually done, those are not legally binding contracts because they lack as the main elements of a legal contract, which is an offer, an acceptance, and both offer and acceptance must have a declaration of intent that shows that who gave the offer or gave the acceptance, and shows that this person had the intent to do so. So the Ethereum smart contracts don't do that, and we pursue that as all our users go through identity verification, and we provide a link to this verification with a identity system. And the contract text itself is very declarative. It says who has what obligations and what rights.
So it's very interesting. I was reading your white paper and, browsing your website before the call. I believe it was last week at some point, but sort of did some research on like which aspect is legally binding. And it seems to me, and correct me if I'm misunderstanding, some of what I read in the white paper. It seems to me, is there actually a separate contract being signed, similar to like, with traditional business, two people would sit down and sign a piece of paper or do that digitally? Or does that signature and everything live within the smart contract?
Yeah, so we're building this together with the digital signature, digital identity system. So there is no necessity for a paper contract which would be signed in front of a table. However, it can be modified for this, but we don't pursue this. So we are also creating this digital signature. Most of our team is from Estonia, so we really know how digital signature and digital identity is used, and we're very confident we can pull this off. We know very well about regulations on digital signatures already. It's the regulation is not very restricting in this area, most importantly in European Union, and we see that we can use this already.
Very cool. So it's actually, and this is probably the source of my confusion around that. I believe there was an illustration or something like that on your website where it showed like the smart contract code, and then separately there was something which looked, something along the lines of a PDF that people were signing. So I just want to clarify for everybody listening that it's all happening within one process. There's no separate document being signed, correct?
Yes, there is no separate document being signed. The good thing is that with digital signatures, you can sign the one thing which is in the same data set, because an algorithm goes through the same data set and it creates a hash for that. And the legally binding part is the human readable part of it. It's just that it automatically generates the code, and the code runs accordingly to the contract. And if there is some kind of someone wants to exploit the code somehow, or this is some things which we want to really avoid, but the legal contract, the human readable contract, shows the responsibilities. And so if someone exploits the code somehow, they're still responsible of carrying out the contract as set in the human readable part.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, I want to sort of get your thoughts on this. You mentioned, that it would be possible for something like this to kind of be integrated into Ethereum. Am I correct that Agrello is a separate blockchain?
It's not. It doesn't work as a usual blockchain. It works kind of like a site data storage which synchronizes with information in blockchain. It has kind of those nodes. It's similar. How it works is that both contract parties have the contract information of their relationship between them. They have identical data sets in both of their storages, and every state of this information is hashed into the blockchain. And when it's checked again, it's hashed, and the hash is checked. The hash is checked with the one registered in the blockchain previously. And if this hash is incorrect, then it takes the data from the repository which is correct, and overwrites it. So it's there is kind of like a consensus mechanism inside built into this, but it needs a blockchain to help this.
Okay, so you mentioned.
I can expand a bit.
Yeah, please do. And I'd like to know, like, specifically, and Alex, I think this would be something great for you to respond to. Could users store that data on any blockchain, or does it have to be like a specific blockchain?
No. The point is that Agrello is blockchain agnostic cross-organizational collaboration framework. It actually has quite a long history. So, in fact, I've worked on this for over 15 years, way before Ethereum came out. So I did my PhD basically on cross-organizational process automation, and came up in my PhD with now we would call it a smart contract language. So what I was missing back then was just blockchain transaction processing platform. But the idea is that with the Agrello framework, you cross-organizationally bridge the transactions between parties in a process-aware way. And that's with this approach, you can't assume that every collaborating party only uses one type of blockchain transaction platform. So let's say everybody just uses Ethereum or Lisk or just Quantum. This is not realistic, but instead each organization has its own in-house platform. So it might be on one end Ethereum, and another one might be maybe Lisk. So the idea is that you have to map the high-level declarative language from the Agrello side onto the in-house language levels. So in most cases it would be Solidity, but some other platforms like Neo use C# or Java, or the other languages coming up, like just heard that Tesos is coming out with a more functional formal language. So if you have cross-organizationally the collaboration defined using the Agrello language, then parts have to be respectively mapped onto the blockchain transaction platforms that respective organizations use in-house.
Yeah, that's very cool. I mean, it's great that you mentioned platform agnosticism, the ability to sort of use any blockchain platform. I'm kind of seeing a pattern with new ICOs that are launching, and yours, of course, as well, where people are sort of moving to that platform agnostic stance, which I think is smart because, as I'm sure you all know, there are multiple blockchain platforms, and I'm sure most of our listeners know that as well. And it's highly unlikely that one will sort of emerge as the victor, if you call it that, because I think they all have unique use cases and unique benefits and also disadvantages as well. But
yes, yeah.
Could you talk about the specific platforms you will support? You know, you mentioned Lisk, you mentioned Quantum, you mentioned NEM. Are those it, or are there more?
I have talked personally with people representing even more. I've talked representatives from NEM. I have had conversations with Eternity a little bit. We're collaborating with Metaverse from China. They are kind of a asset-focused blockchain. And
OnShares Neo?
OnShares currently, which rebranded to Neo.
Mm-hmm.
And
Qtum?
Yeah, Qtum, Lisk. I've been talking to Max from there. And so anything which we kind of see, we went to consensus. A lot of them were there. Where it was very nice to speak with a lot of them. I see a lot of good different platforms. The thing is that we step by step start trying out others. First, we start with Ethereum. Then we go to some other small block of others, then others and others. So I see a lot of potential and different features in many different blockchains which we could use. and the list is certainly not exclusive, which we have already.
Okay, very cool. And are there different use cases for each of these, blockchain platforms that you support, or are they all sort of accomplishing the same thing and it's sort of up to user preference?
Mostly they are the same use case. However, some blockchains have something which is interesting, which we might use for certain use cases, like Metaverse has this identity approach. They have something interesting developing there. In them, they on the public blockchain, they have really thought through the time consensus. So you have a really strong timestamp for the signatures. This is something which is really interesting. We might use this for document signatures, and there are like, of course, POS blockchains. If they happen to be successful, then they can carry much more volumes. They are very interesting.
POS, just for the users who aren't familiar, is proof of stake, correct?
Yes, proof of stake. And we are also looking into agnostically. We are approaching agnostically to storage as well, where the contract information which the parties have, where it's stored. So we start with Amazon Web Services, but we are very interested in distributed storage systems like SIA, like IPFS, storage.io. And SIA, for example, as I understood, has their own blockchain as well, which is interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like there's a huge opportunity there for you to sort of distribute as many aspects of this platform as possible, wherever the contract's stored or where the actual hashes are, verified. And would it be possible just to, like, let's say I'm signing a document with someone for the sale of my company, or I'm the sale of my home, and it's a very, very important contract that I want to make sure is, legally binding and verified. Could I verify, the transactions and the signatures and sort of all the steps that people take when they send a contract back and forth? Could I verify all of that in multiple blockchains, or just in case one, in the future becomes obsolete, or do I have to pick one specifically?
We had this idea that parties, each user can choose what platform they trust, what storage and what blockchain. Of course, it's quite far in the development timeline to really get there, but this is an interesting idea. And I also thought we have thought a little bit about this, that the hashes can be stored in parallel in different blockchains. One is trusted by one of the sides, and the other is trusted by the other side. And this kind of even like parallel hashing. But as blockchains are quite new technology, there's scalability issues, so we don't really know if it will really work out. But this is something which we have certainly thought of, like multiple blockchains having the same transaction records.
Yeah. And just real quick before you continue, I want to touch on the hashing part of things and storing these hashes. I'm sure there are many users that are listening that are relatively new to the blockchain space and maybe aren't familiar with what a hash is. Could you explain that very briefly?
Well, a hash is that an algorithm runs through all of the bits in one file or data set, and this algorithm generates a line of numbers and letters, and this is unique to this file set. And if one bit changes, for example, if there is a picture, if one pixel changes, the hash already changes as well. So this hash can be stored in the blockchain, and the next time it's this data set is watched again, the algorithm can go through this again, and you can see if it gives the same hash which was registered.
So it's just essentially a unique identifier that like prevents tampering and sort of verifies that something happened.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I want to talk, and Alex, this may be a good point for you to jump in as well. I was reading through your white paper and your website, and I saw that there's this thing called the AI counselor, the artificial intelligence counselor. And to quote your website, it said, artificially intelligent agents manage your smart agreements, triggering payments and fulfilling obligations on your behalf. So what I'm curious if you could answer for me, is this actually artificial intelligence? Like what sort of software are you using, or is this just kind of a lot of what we're seeing in the space, like buzzwords where people throw around artificial intelligence to gain more interest?
I mean, it's a limited form of artificial intelligence. So the concrete agents we consider are so-called belief, desire, intention agents. So they are agents that can carry anthropomorphic properties. That means human-like properties, and each agent is assumed to represents a respective collaborating party. So this is also nothing new. When I did my PhD, that was partially financed by an EU project called Crosswork, with a pan-European consortium of universities and companies. And already there we used agents in the same manner. So the concrete approach we take for the BDI agents is that they're going to be programmed in JSON, which has been around for quite some time. And so with JSON, you can, in agent speak, you can program a rule space with these beliefs, desires, and intentions that represent really the values of a respective collaborating party. So if we talk about artificial intelligence, what the hardcore people usually then associate with it is, like machine learning, deep learning, it's basically big data, pattern mining with machine learning approaches. So this is not something we consider for now. So we are more humble and modest, but clearly adopting multi-agent system approach with belief, desire, intention agents, we have a limited notion of artificial intelligence adopted. The other thing which we achieve this way is that the agents can form a composed oracle, which is then responsible for challenging in trusted information into a smart contract. So thereby what you really create is a self-aware contract, really. And the agents compose themselves into an oracle on top of a lifecycle management layer. So this is also something I've worked out in another research project which I did as a postdoc in Finland at the University of Helsinki. It was an Academy Finland funded project. And essentially this lifecycle management allows for proper vetting of respective agents. They form a collaborating e-community that is then this oracle, and they are challenging in trusted information. So if a violation occurs, so the agents are governed by the obligations in the contract, and if a violation occurs, then the lifecycle management layer provides a governance mechanism, so the remaining agents can engage in a voting mechanism that is escalated to the human agents involved. So basically, the real humans in the background. So it's a socio-technical approach where the agents take away tedious work from humans who can then focus on decision making and creative work.
So these agents are basically managing the smart contract in some way, and are they like, what's their core role? Yes,
the collaboration part, oracle function, and also they engage in conflict management resolution with the help of the lifecycle management. So that's the idea. So if you go through the white paper, you'll find many references to published literature about this.
Mm-hmm. The agents in like basic practical terms, they guide the parties through the process of execution of contract, and they can do some dispute resolution. It's also possible to hold deposits with them, as with crypto wallets, and they can manage this. However, as Alex said, it's a socio-technical approach. It leaves some decisions to be made by humans, as those agents can. It wouldn't be even preferable to have them decide some things by themselves. So it follows the requirements of an actual business relationship, which might be very volatile, and you don't know really. Sometimes you don't really know what will happen, and no AI or no agent can always expect all circumstantial changes.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, to unpack a couple of those terms, so oracles are essentially like, to give a very sort of broad example, if I made a smart contract bet with someone, and this probably isn't something that would be in Agrello, but if I said, hey, I want to verify, if it rains on this day, this person's going to pay me this money, and I win the bet. And the oracle would essentially be passing in the data about whether or not it rained on that day. Is that correct?
Yes, and the problem is if you have a centralized oracle, you run into scalability problems, certainly in a multilateral collaboration scenario. And if you instead have a set of agents that compose themselves into an oracle, then you end up with a scalable solution for information and value transfer logistics. And also, if it turns out that an agent acts malevolently, the oracle can heal itself again. And
what do you mean by that?
Through the voting mechanism. So, for example, an agent can be voted out and replaced by another one, and therefore the trust among the agents in this composed oracle is restored.
So these agents are humans, or they're software, or they both?
No, they're software, but they're guided by the lifecycle management layer. And as I said, the agents can escalate decision making to the humans that the agents are working for on behalf.
Okay, so in what situation, and Hando, maybe you can answer this as well. I keep seeing you trying to chime in. In what situation would somebody actually want to vote out one of these AI agents?
It's possible in a situation where agent is receiving somewhere. It's receiving false information. It's connected to some wrong link, or it's the agent's code itself has been changed or tampered in a way that it does not fulfill the purposes of this agent or those beliefs and desires of these agents.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's the whole concept is very curious to me. I mean, it was kind of interesting watching your overview video, I guess if you could call it that, on your website. And it does this introduction, and generally when you see an interview, or an overview for an ICO, it says like, this is Agrello, this is what it does. But in this case, and I guess this sort of plays into the whole artificial intelligent counselor, these agents, and that whole feature set. It said, I am Agrello, I'm doing this, and it was kind of this, personified robot that was walking people through what it was. One thing that I want to clarify, though, is, isn't this just an extension of what smart contracts already do? Like, is this whole association with Agrello, this sort of robot type being the thing, the entity that's making these decisions, is this just a way to familiarize what a smart contract does to users, or is it actually doing something additional on top of what we know that smart contracts and oracles can already do today?
Maybe I can answer that. So if you take current solutions like Solidity on Ethereum, and you take the term smart contract literally, then we're not really talking about smart contracts. So you develop a so-called contract in Solidity, you don't really have a contract, because you lack the key concepts that are relevant for lawyers to make it a contract. And it's just JavaScript type of code, basically. And it's also not necessarily made for supporting cross-organizational peer-to-peer collaborations. So we try to take that literally. We take smartness literally by adopting a multi-agent system approach with the BDI, Leave Desire Intention Agents. And also we have a higher level declarative language approach that integrates these very important contract concepts for lawyers that are obligations and rights.
Yeah, I understand the sort of the differences between your system and Solidity smart contracts on Ethereum. But what I'm really just trying to clarify is these agents. I mean, are they adding any additional functionality? Because these things that you're mentioning, like the ability to trigger payments and fulfill obligations and pull data in from an oracle, these are things that are already possible with existing smart contract platforms today. So what is the agent doing?
The agent is doing those functionalities. You can basically code this all into one big smart contract. But what's missing is this declarative language, because to do something in legal relationship, you need to declare what is there to be done and what is the protocol to do something. And the agent just has the task to go over this, see this, and act on the purpose of this.
Right, but my point is the agent is just the smart contract, correct? Like it's not a separate entity that's doing this.
Well, actually, they are orchestrated by the contract. So, I mean, they are separate entities acting on behalf of collaborating parties, and they're orchestrated by the contract language.
Yeah, I'm just confused. It's another piece of software that's doing these things because
programmed in JSON. That's right.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the whole concept's very interesting because it's like I'm still not 100% clear on, and perhaps I'm misunderstanding something somewhere along the way. I'm not 100% clear on what value those agents add because, like I said, all the things you're mentioning seem to be able to be done by smart contracts. So it would seem, from my perspective, fairly new to the concept, and I've read a little bit of the white paper and the website, of course, but it would seem, from my perspective, that the agent is really just the smart contract and not separate software. So if you could talk a little bit more about like what that separate software does. I mean, it's just initiating the contracts. It's doing dispute resolution and things like that. Why is that in a separate piece of software and not just built into the smart contract in some way?
You don't have to program each time you make a new contract with a new concept inside, new purpose. You don't have to reprogram a new agent for that. You can do the declarative part, the contract part. You get away from this very difficult coding, which is currently done with a Solidity smart contract. And this is what it allows us to do.
Okay, so it's almost like a standardized way to do these specific things without having to rewrite the code over and over.
Yes, and but it gives us the possibility to go into each type of contract relationship, whether it's rent, whether it's sales, whether it's some service, and this is what it allows.
Oh, okay, interesting. So kind of like a template in a way for how the contract should behave?
Yeah, but this allows the possibility that everyone can create easily their template from ground up. New template again, but they don't have to code for this. They just create the declarative part, and based on this, agents know what to do.
Okay, that makes sense. And to kind of switch gears a bit, which I think ties into this a little bit, would be going back to what you mentioned about oracles. So oracles, of course, being able to pass some kind of trusted or previously agreed upon data into the contract to verify it and then execute things based on that data. Could you give me a couple examples of like where this data would be pulled from and how people would agree upon, the source of that data?
Yeah,
So,
go on.
Okay, Hando, you can go first.
Okay, so I can give you an example which we used in the white paper. We were using this rental agreement use case, where those agents, first of all, there are two agents which are for the parties. They act based on their rights and obligations. And a central agent, which is the neutral one between. And they also can add in third-party agents from external layer, like a gas counter for filling in automatically the gas measurements. Also electricity counter, the smart lock itself. When they bind those agents into the contract parties can agree, okay, those sources we trust. And then they sign the contract and they initiate it. And after this, if some of them acts malevolently, it's possible to vote them out again, and the parties can decide on a new agent and so on. Alex, if you want to add something, you can add as well.
Yes, I mean, the lifecycle management layer is really facilitating the connecting of the agents to dedicated APIs where you have trusted data come from. And so I've published a journal paper about this, actually the entire conflict management part. So I referenced that also in the white paper. So yeah, the idea is really if based on the obligations, a situation occurs where there's ambiguity that the contract level itself can't resolve, then at least in my journal paper, the assumption is that you take the dispute and put it on the next high level where agents basically engage in negotiations to resolve the conflict until the consensus is reached. And once the consensus is reached, then the outcome is basically pushed down again to the contract level, where the enactment may continue. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and there's a term that's we've used a couple times, and that's the life cycle management layer. So if either of you could kind of dive in and unpack that a little bit and explain what that is, that'd be great.
So I heard something similar being talked about, but it's more called like an e-governance or governance layer. I heard something similar recently in Tesos.
Okay, it sounds similar to Aragon as well, who we had on the podcast previously.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this life cycle has several stages. One is basically a stage for the setup where you create templates that are housed in a hub, in a contract hub. And for rapid deployment, the idea is that you take a template out and you populate it with service types and roles, and then concrete parties populate those roles, and a negotiation phase is triggered. So there are three options. One is one party disagrees. That's already enough to have a failure on consensus. The other option is a party offers a counter or produces a counter offer, which needs to be renegotiated, or you have a full agreement. Then you have full consensus to establish the contract. And after that, you basically roll out your governance infrastructure to the respective parties so that they can also set themselves up in-house.
Okay.
And cross-organizationally engage. And then comes the enactment stage. It might be that during the enactment stage, as I said, some obligation is violated. There are several responses. They can be either disruptive or you could say healing. Let's assume an obligation is violated and maybe some untrusted information is channeled in by an agent, but the behavior was not malevolent, it was just the context changed. And due to the context change, an obligation is now outdated. So the triggered voting mechanism may result in the outcome that simply the obligation needs to be modified to match the new context, but there's no need to replace the actual agent party. So this is a healing response.
Okay, so it's basically like all of the different stages of the contract from sort of inception all the way through to completion.
Yes, and also orderly termination, of course. So that's very important. If you have such a complex collaboration scenario, you need to understand how to orderly turn off your business semantics flow, so that you don't leave anything behind that eventually drowns your collaboration platform and makes it drain performance.
Oh, yes. Okay, very cool. And Hando, do you have anything to add to that?
No, actually, I think Alex can explain the life cycle management the best. He has worked in that so long.
Okay, great.
Yes, for many years, and I've also published quite a bit about it in peer-reviewed conference and journal papers.
Let's go ahead and jump into talking about your platform and the ICO specifically, but first I want to talk about your partners. So in reading your blog, I noticed that you have a couple partnerships that you've announced, and maybe there are more than this, but one is with Incap, INCAP, which is a Finnish electronics manufacturer. So if you want to start with that, I noticed you mentioned that you said, quote, "We're going to implement Agrello smart agreement prototype to automate Incap's labor management process." So if you could talk about that partnership and what you're expecting, that'd be great.
Yes, sure. So we have this enterprise part. Enterprises have a lot of custom requirements, and we have been searching use cases, and from this company we found an interesting one. They're electronics manufacturer, but they do prototyping and even IoT, and they want to be better on this administrative part in labor. And what they have is that they have a production plan for each product they're gonna manufacture in mass production. And what they're interested in is to automatically allocate labor onto this production plan based on the employees' skill sets, and also based on the employment contract, because the employment contract has restrictions on the working time, and it also depends on some other outer information which would come into the employment contract. And with that as well, also automatic salary payments and other things inside the contract, like access management and so on. And yes, we have noticed that a lot of these things are very connected with the employment contract.
Yeah, it sounds like they're essentially automating a significant amount of their process using Agrello.
Yes, it will be quite a work to be done there, but we see that it's totally feasible. And with the declarative language we have created, this helps a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it's always great to see like a real world example, especially, with the current state of the ICO market being a lot of these ICOs launching without a product or without, any partners lined up. So it's always cool to see some sort of real world example that actually makes, a substantial difference in somebody's business or personal life or whatever it may be. But then to sort of move forward into the second partnership that I read about, it's called ViewFin, which is the company behind the Metaverse blockchain. And you said the partnership is to, quote, "develop a shared digital identity," end quote. So if you could talk about that, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, they're very they're like asset-focused blockchain, and they have kind of a hybrid between Ethereum and Bitcoin blockchain, and they use this UTXO transaction method, and they are, as they can register assets, your identity can also be an asset which is registered in the blockchain. And now we're working on together to have this identity solution, the identity vehicle, that there is an identity registered in the blockchain, and it can be used for digital signatures mainly. It can also be used later on for authentication or like logins and so on. And this is where we want to get. Their approach is our approach supplements what they have. They have more this generative identity, which becomes more stronger through actions. But we also add up this the genesis, which is the government issued identity, and together with that we can have an identity system where people come in with their government issued identity. They're identified there, but they can strengthen their identity, basically, which is like a credibility rate or something. They can increase the strength of their identity and trustworthiness with this identity system.
Yeah, is that a partnership with a government, you said?
No. For the identity verification, for government issued identity verification, we don't have to partner up with governments. For that, there are solutions already out there. And currently, we have very good discussions with an Estonian company called Verif, which does automatic identity verification or this government issued ID verification all around the world. It works in a way that you just make, as usual in crypto exchanges, you make pictures of your ID card or passport and yourself, and they even provide a video call solution, which we will not use in the beginning at least. And they have access to identity databases all around the world in a way that they can check whether the identity document is real. All the information there matches, and they can also have face verification that
Yeah, that sounds great. I think that would be a good place to stop. If we could just go ahead and kind of tell people, when your ICO launches and where they can find out more information about Agrello, that'd be great.
Yes. You can find all the information through our social channels, through agrello.org, the website. The social channels are also on the website. Subscribe for the newsletter. We will also give more details about the token sale soon, but it's expected to arrive very, very, very soon, in the middle of this month. We're just currently working on our own token distribution platform. We want to make this secure, that no one loses anything and all goes well. So we're still working on some technical details and technical fiddling with the platform. And once we are set, then we'll unleash more information about that.
Awesome. That sounds great. So that's Agrello, agrello.org, correct?
Yes.
Perfect.
And just a small note: we have been noticing a lot of fraudulent activity, if it's correct to say that. Different groups, different aliases are trying to sell our tokens. I want to be precise that only through our organization, our representatives, any agreements can be made, and we don't publicly promote any sales of our tokens yet. There will be an official announcement, and everything will go through our token sale platform.
Awesome. That's good to know, especially as a lot of these fake websites and things like that are popping up. So I appreciate that notice to everyone. Well, Hando, Alex, it's been great talking with you, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Yes.
Awesome. And
Thank you very much.
best of luck with the launch of the ICO.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I sincerely appreciate it. If you'd like to request someone to be on the podcast, tweet us at ICO Alert and let us know. We're trying to cover all the ICOs. That includes past ICOs, present ICOs, and ICOs that are, of course, happening in the future. Thank you again, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe to get updates when we publish a new episode. Also, don't forget to check out ICOalert.com for our in-depth analysis of upcoming ICOs, as well as our comprehensive list of every initial coin offering. I'm your host, Robert Finch, and I'll be back next week or sooner with a brand new episode.